collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, the discovery of 3 dead vultures has dealt a huge blow to the island's most endangered species.
The aim has to be to have a satellite tag on all our free-flying vultures, because the risk of poisoning is so acute at the moment that we just need to be able to keep tabs on them in this way.
A union leader discusses the proposals for a minimum wage.
We are expecting at the end of this month from the Ministry of Labour to give us their final suggestions about the minimum wage.
And if you have a musical instrument that you no longer use, a local charity would love to have it.
We offer music education to children and young people in Cyprus, including migrants, refugees, and children and young people with less opportunities.
You've perhaps heard us talk on the programme before about the Vulture project, entitled Life with Vultures. It's a conservation project that has seen a lot of help being given to our endangered vultures here in Cyprus, including flying in birds from Spain. And this week there was a huge blow. Our endangered population has now sunk to just 8. And that's from a number of around 15 to 20 last year. Joining us from BirdLife Cyprus is Martin Helikar. Martin, 3 dead vultures in 1 week. This is appalling.
It is indeed appalling and a real shock to everyone involved in the project, and especially BirdLife Cyprus and our officers dedicated to this particular effort. But it's been felt keenly by everyone involved. Yesterday, we were out in the field carrying out the vulture census, which is done every winter and every spring. Yesterday's was a different kind of census in terms of how it felt to those of us involved, because we were out there in hope very much that it was going to be just the 3 victims that we know, because we have the bodies, have been killed. But actually, as you mentioned, we counted 8, whereas the previous census we counted 15, possibly 20. Vulture is a very wide-ranging species, so it's very difficult to come to an exact number. It's possible that there are more than 8 out there, but unfortunately, it's reasonable to assume that 8 is what we have. So actually, we've lost half of this very small, this painfully small population. And it emphasizes once more, if it needed emphasizing, how huge the risk is with poisoning.
I presume that the bodies that you've recovered will be examined to see whether it was poisoning. It doesn't look from the photos in the press as if there was any sort of physical damage to them, so one would assume it is. How quickly will you get toxicology results?
Yeah, that's a very good question, a very pertinent question, and it's something we're actually discussing today with everyone involved. So it seems clear that it was poisoning, sadly. What is not clear, what has not been determined yet, and we're waiting for the results, and there's been a necropsy and then toxicological tests which are being carried out by the dedicated team at the state lab. We need to find out whether we're talking about illegal use of a poison bait, something like a strong pesticide, and a carcass or meat laced with this, or whether we're talking about the vultures falling foul to veterinary medicines, NSAIDs, things that are administered to animals in the routine treatment, but there's a right way and a wrong way to administer. Both are possibilities at the moment. It's too early to know. We know that the poisoning issue is a huge issue across our countryside, and that's why it's one of the key actions of our project, to try and make progress, to finally make progress on an issue that we've known has been a huge threat for our ecosystems for decades. And this is the first time we've had an actual targeted, concerted effort through the Life with Vultures project to deal with it. So we know it was a problem. Of course, it's a huge blow to have this particular incident just a matter of days before we were planning to release the 15 vultures that were brought over from Spain that are being held in a suitable holding cage at the moment. The plan was to release them later this month. For obvious reasons, that will be delayed now until we know exactly what's going on, until we know we've dealt with the immediate risk in the release areas, immediate risk from poison. The dog units, the sniffer dog units that have been set up as part of this project have been out and active as part of this incident. They've only just started their work, but they're one thing that gives us hope for dealing with this problem. I think it's also important to note that the reason we found out about this poisoning, because you can imagine that it's easy to lose vultures and not to know about it, not to find out about it.
But Icarus had
census.
But I think that one of them you had already put a tracker on.
That's exactly what I was going to say. We have satellite tags, fantastic bits of technology, on a number of the vultures. The vultures that are going to be released when we feel reasonably confident that the coast is at least more clear of poison will all have satellite tags, and the aim has to be to have a satellite tag on all our free-flying vultures, because the risk of poisoning is so acute at the moment that we just need to be able to keep tabs on them in this way.
Well, and I presume it also alerted you to the fact, did it, that
Absolutely,
if Icarus had suddenly stopped showing any movement, there was a problem.
Yeah. No, it's amazing the level of detail that these tags give you when you have an expert analysing it. We know exactly when he suffered the first symptoms of poisoning. We know exactly when he died. We know all that sad history of what went on here. Not true for the two chicks that were found in the nest because they hadn't been tagged yet. But I repeat, our aim working with the authorities is to make sure that all vultures, all our remaining vultures and all vultures brought in from Spain to reinforce our remaining population are tagged so that we know at any moment how they're doing.
The two chicks that were found in the nest, does one sadly assume that they were fed poisoned something by their parents, who are presumably also dead somewhere in the area?
That has to be the assumption, sadly. They were not tagged, so we don't have the bodies.
From the from the pictures, it didn't look like they had fledged yet.
No, they were still in the nest. So obviously that's what's happened. The parents are busy feeding them, and brought poisoned food to them.
8 left. I mean, you mentioned the ones that are still caged up, but how easy is it for a population to recover enough to become sustainable when the numbers are this low?
Without help, impossible. Absolutely impossible. We need to support this very important species. We need to support this emblematic species. We need to support this fantastic provider of ecosystem services, cleaning up the countryside of carcasses. It really is indispensable in our ecosystem. It would be a huge loss on so many levels. If we don't continue this program, we're already discussing about the next Life with Vultures program, because it's going to be necessary. We need to pour support onto this species if we're going to hope for the future. We do remain hopeful, Rosie. This was a battle we lost, but we haven't lost the war. We will not lose the war, but it really does need everyone to pull together, everyone to play their part, from NGOs like us to the Game and Fauna Service to the police to the state lab. The good thing, if there is a silver lining to this, is that everyone really has pulled together after this horrible shock to the system. We're already talking very actively about how we can, A, make sure that whoever did this, the perpetrator, does end up paying the full penalty for this disaster inflicted on our ecosystems. And two, determined to make sure that we're much more ready next time to deal with this. We will continue supporting them. We need to continue supporting them until we turn it around, until this becomes a success story. It's a dark day. It's been a dark week, but we have to get there, and we're determined to get there.
And one of the things you're doing, I believe, with the Life with Vultures project is trying to go around the rural areas and the villagers who tend to put out poison bait for things like foxes, even though that's illegal as well. But it obviously requires some sort of communication within those communities. How is your awareness raising going?
It's a big part of the project. For the reasons that you explained, it has to be a big part of the project. It's going great in the sense that people love vultures. People do love vultures. They really are an emblematic species. You go to these communities, they remember when vultures were abundant, and they would love to see that back. The problem, people are not targeting vultures. That's the thing to say. People do love vultures. The problem is that people are using poison to target foxes, to target stray dogs, and they're not fully aware of the impact that has on the ecosystem and on vultures in particular. And that's what we're working hard on now, to make sure that people make that connection, know it's illegal, know the penalties, know that we are keeping an eye on this, know that our vultures will, in the coming months and years, be all of them tagged, so we'll know where they are, know that the dog units are out there doing their job, and there's two aspects of that. That's finding the poisons before they kill vultures or eagles or hedgehogs or anything else, and they have an important awareness-raising role. They have an important publicity role. It's been shown in other countries that these dog units have been put out into the field. They can play a great role in raising awareness. So, yes, we're in the coffee shops, we're in the schools, we'll continue to do that. The role of the media is very important in getting this message out there. I said it already, but, the Life with Vultures project that we're implementing now, they're a crucial role. The next project will take us even further down the line, but this is something that everyone has got to help with. Poison is an absolute nightmare. It's like entering a room blindfolded with a machine gun and just shooting. You just don't know what's going to be hit. What you do know is that it's going to have an impact far beyond the target species. That's why it's illegal. That's why it has to be illegal. That's why we have to start getting some poisoners taken to court. That's got to change. It's never happened so far.
And not just taken to court, but fined and imprisoned. It's a pretty hefty fine, I think, of initially 20,000, but if they're found guilty of substantial damage to protected species, I think I read somewhere it's €500,000 fine and 10 years in prison.
Yeah, no, the penalties are there. The problem is at the moment, poisoners don't feel any risk of being found out. That's one of the things we need to change. There's a lot of things we need to change, and we're working on all those fronts, and I can assure you the team at BirdLife Cyprus are incredibly determined, incredibly hurt by what's happened in the last few days. But it just reinforces the determination to get this really important job done. The vultures are the flagship for this effort, but stopping the poisoning will have a huge positive impact across the board in our ecosystem.
Well,
there is a risk to human health, and I don't just mean indirectly because we're undermining ecosystem health, but there's a direct risk to human health from this poison being put out in the countryside. We need to tackle this problem, and we need to do it collectively. And BirdLife Cyprus is proud to be leading this effort, and will continue to do so.
Well, as I'm about to say, that in actual fact there is, of course, every time we see poisoning incidents, and they happen in towns as well as out in the countryside, there are fears that one day a child may touch or pick up something, and then, goodness knows, it would be a dreadful tragedy, but this loss of 3 of our vultures when there are so few, also a terrible tragedy. Martin, keep us informed, will you, as to how things are going, and let's hope that the ones waiting to be released will have a safer life.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Rosie. Thanks for the support.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
We're expected to introduce a national minimum wage. It's something that's been in the pipeline for a very long time. And to discuss the issue with us, we welcome the chief of the PEO union, Sotiroula Haralambos. She's also a former Labour minister, so well versed in minimum wage legalities. Sotiroula, can you start, please, by explaining how we're going to introduce this?
The first thing that I want to underline is that there is a necessity to introduce the minimum wage in Cyprus because of the problems we are facing in the labour market the last years due to the economic crisis and then due to the pandemic. Because what we have witnessed in Cyprus is a deregulation of the labour rights. We have many people, especially young people, who work without basic rights, like the right to have a certain salary, fixed working hours. They have many low wages. And on the other hand, the other problem that we are facing is the problem that in areas where we have collective agreements, not all the employers implement the terms and the conditions that they are written down in the collective agreement. This is why I'm saying that this discussion of the minimum wage, which is a discussion that we started, as you already said, years ago, it has to do with the fight and the struggle we are giving as workers' movement against the regulation. What we understand and what is our demand when discussing the minimum wage. On the one hand, we want to have an arrangement which will defend the rights of those that they don't have collective agreements. So we will have a minimum wage for these people. And additionally to that, it is very important when setting the minimum wage to be very clear that in areas where we have collective agreements, and these collective agreements, they do have agreed minimum wage, for example, in the construction area, we do have collective agreements. In these cases, the minimum wage that is going to be implemented is going to be the minimum wage that is agreed in the collective agreements. And as you may know, we are in the final stage of this discussion. We are expecting at the end of this month from the Ministry of Labour to give us their final suggestions about the minimum wage.
Now, what you just said about the construction industry, for example, and I suppose the hotel industry is another one with collective agreements, are you saying, therefore, that we'll have different minimum wages depending on which area you work in? Why are we complicating it and not just saying this is the absolute minimum wage because below that level you are poverty-stricken?
Yes, we are not complicating things. What you have said is probably, meaning that whenever in cases that we don't have collective agreement, the minimum wage will be the wage that no one can get a salary below that. But what we want to underline is it is also important in cases where we have more wages that they are above the minimum wage. Also to be clear that these wages will be the ones that they are obligatory in those areas and in those cases. Because if we don't say that, there is a danger in areas that we have collective agreements and the minimum wages in that areas are above the minimum wage. And those that they are newcomers in those areas to go and to be recruited with the minimum wage, which is lower. That's why it is important to do both things. On the one hand to set a minimum wage and to be very clear that no one gets below that, but on the same way, when we have wages that they are above, that wage to be the one to be implemented.
So basically, if I understood correctly, there are areas of work in Cyprus where there is actually the equivalent of a minimum wage, but there are several sectors where there isn't a minimum wage, aren't there? So those are the ones...
And those areas are mainly the areas where they are not unionized, we don't have collective agreements. So these are the two areas that we have to, by setting the minimum wage, to be sure that minimum wage will be in favor of the whole wage setting mechanism.
Right, now then, the thing that concerns me about the proposed legislation is that the two probably lowest paid areas of work in Cyprus are excluded. I'm talking about domestic helpers and agricultural workers. They can't unionise. And they are, let's face it, you know this well, taken advantage of. Why are they not, and why are all the unions not saying that they should be included in the minimum wage?
Already Beo has said that. We are not in favor of having any exclusions from the minimum wage salary. We think that if the cause and if the purpose of a minimum wage is to fight against cheap labor, that means that all workers in Cyprus, that they are below what is going to be set as the minimum wage, they have to go and receive the minimum wage. PEO is very clear. We are not in favor of any exclusion.
Well, and the two areas I've just mentioned, agricultural workers and domestic help, I think we all acknowledge are mostly filled by third country nationals, some of whom are trafficked.
That's why, on principle, and this is the position that PEO has taken, is that we cannot exclude any worker who works in Cyprus from the minimum wage.
And what's been the reaction?
If we do that, that means that we accept that there are going to be areas of cheap, irregular work.
Yes, exactly. So what's been the reaction?
And this will undermine the purpose and the goal of the minimum wage. And also this is going to be controversial with the ILO convention when it comes especially to the domestic workers.
So what has been the reaction, Sotirula, when you've raised these points? Because at the moment it seems that the bill is going ahead.
The ministry, the government and the Ministry of Labour, they said that they want to exclude this. This is their position, that they want to exclude them. I cannot speak about the others. I can speak about my union and what is our position.
And have you managed to talk to anybody on the parliamentary committee that is likely to pass this bill?
Well, we don't know if there is going to be a new legislation that is going to be voted in the parliament about the introduction of the minimum wage, or whether the existence minimum wage law and the right from the minister to have a decree for minimum wage will be used. So, but of course, the parliament, they are free and able to discuss if they want this, but the legislative way that the government will use to have the minimum wage it's something that it's upon the government to be decided. But of course, these positions I am telling now, they are positions that from my organization, we have published them, we tell them every day, so they are well known.
Well, let's see what happens when it goes to Parliament. Sotirula Haralambos, the Secretary-General of the PEO Trade Union and former Labour Minister. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Listen online to the Cyprus News Digest on YouTube or at cyprusmail.libsyn.com. The latest program is uploaded every Friday, and if you missed one, you can catch up there.
And let's end this week's programme on a lighter note, because Sistema Cyprus, which is an organisation founded back in 2018, but based, I think, on an idea that was first instituted in Venezuela back in the 1970s, they've put out a call for musical instruments. Let's find out first from their co-founder and executive director what Sistema actually does. Nicoletta Polidoro, thanks for joining me. So in a nutshell, what do you do?
So in a nutshell, as you said, we are a social music orchestra program, and yes, we started in 2018, and as you said, Sistema was inspired by the El Sistema in Venezuela that started in 1975, and their biggest aim was to save as many children as possible from the streets and from the risks that the area in Caracas, firstly, the children were facing. After that, El Sistema has been in more than 70 countries and more than 150 programs around the world, and more than 1.5 million children are involved today in El Sistema-inspired programs. In Cyprus, we offer music education to children and young people in Cyprus, including migrants, refugees, and children and young people with less opportunities. And our aim is to ensure that they are respected, recognized, and included in the society.
And of course, music education is so important in so many different aspects of a child's development. But the problem, as you mentioned there, I think, by saying the less advantaged children, is that musical instruments are expensive. And that brings us to your call, I think, in the last fortnight or so, for people who have musical instruments to donate them so that you can match them up with a young musician.
Exactly. So we have the Sistema Cyprus Symphony Orchestra, and we are about to start our second orchestra. And this means that we will welcome more than 50 children to join our program. And we have 50 children in the waiting list, waiting to be part of Sistema Cyprus. So in our effort, we offer the instruments for free to the children, as also the lessons, of course, and all the experience. So we always ask for the people, for the society, to donate instruments that they might not use anymore, that they might started learning an instrument and then stopped, or even cases where they started playing the violin and they have a smaller size violin, and then they have their 4/4 size. So in a way that the instruments are not used, they can donate to Sistema Cyprus.
And how do they go about doing that?
So they can bring the instruments in all cities, actually, in Sistema Cyprus in Nicosia and Larnaca, and also from the youth information centers in Nicosia, in Paphos, in Amophostos, in Agros, in Limassol, and also in the youth makerspace in Larnaca. They can call in 99902552 for more information.
And I guess you've got a Facebook page. You must have. Everybody's on Facebook in Cyprus, it seems.
Exactly. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and all the information are there, actually, with the collection point and what instruments, and we can say some examples of the instruments that we need, like violins, violas, cellos, double basses, flutes, oboes, clarinets, saxophones, trumpets, trombones, French horns, phoniums, tubas, percussion instruments, even music stands.
Okay, so it's a pretty wide-ranging thing. I think the best thing would be for somebody perhaps to contact you on your social media, say, I've got this, what shall I do, do you want it? It's a great idea, and I've seen photos of the young orchestra. The kids look absolutely blissful to be feeling that they're part of a group of people and being creative. It's a fabulous idea. Nicoletta Polidoro, co-founder and executive director of Sistema in Cyprus, many thanks.
Thank you so much.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.